Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it is going to rain, but I think I'm safe for an hour or so, so I think I'll be okay. The weather, according to Thomas Jefferson, is 71 degrees now, so it's very comfortable to walk. And humidity is 84, which would push up feeling like it was more than 71. And the wind is 6 miles an hour. That's what Jefferson told me, but I don't see it. And I don't know why, because we're in the foothills of what passes for a mountain here in the east. So the Confederates used to come over these mountains to attack the Union troops that bivouacked not far from where I'm walking right now. And neighbors all around have gone up into the mountains and found, relics, bullets, things from mess kits and stuff like that from when the Civil War was being waged. So history is still within your grasp in a concrete, palpable way. It's funny to mention the Civil War in the same breath as I'm going to talk about Trump. The issue, I think, that is worth our time is his notions of retribution, getting even. And I think he's probably the kind of person that would pull the legs off a praying mantis. I remember thinking I was kin to a praying mantis because I think that they should be protected, and I got close to one and it jumped right up into my face. It surprised me. So, interspecies doesn't always work, but respect for life can. And I think Trump has very little respect for life other than his own, and for even being understanding, cordial to anyone else. So when I think of Trump, and I've joked with friends, I imagine large sports arenas holding his political enemies. And since when I was younger and working my way through corruption investigations and so forth in the Southern District of New York as a prosecutor, we had before us as an example how Nixon had created an enemies list, and he tried to get at them using the IRS and other things. So while we don't yet have camps, and we have hope that Trump will not be reelected, we do have a concern given how the next best thing to what he did when he was president was to try to find ways to get whom he considered as his enemies, embarrassing and humiliating those who would dare to offend him. And this is not unheard of in politics, I understand that. But the lengths and extremes and the violations that he was involved in were quite dramatic. And it's always puzzled me why the great stories haven't been written contemporaneous with the offenses of Trump. Cowardice, that's one of it. A fear they'll turn on you, you'll become an enemy, and they'll do you in. And I think that's a large part of it. Certainly those who relied in the Republican Party on getting reelected were concerned about him creating a primary against you if you didn't do what he wanted you to do. So, the Times has a fabulous story today, and it has several, but I may mention another one, but the first one I mentioned because of my interest in the injustice of this man in ways beyond the issues that we consider. So what he did was he tried to encourage Sessions, who was the Attorney General, to go after certain people. He was concerned about Hillary Clinton and James Comey, and he thought he wanted to get them. Now, he had a rationale for each of these, but they were wrong. And people at Justice, the Just Us Department, I suppose it would be fair to say he had his way, but not the ultimate result that he wanted. And let me go through a couple of examples and see if that really fits. His chief of staff, the White House counsel, Donald McGahn, McGahn, he pushed back. He told them that he could not do the things he was doing. But he wrote a memo telling him what the law was, but then did nothing to stop him from violating that law. And this we see is the kind of intimidation and lazy assumption of your responsibility in the most ineffective way possible. When you're writing that memo, are you writing it to inform him or to say, well, I tried to tell him? And it's the latter, plainly. It's a CYA, cover your ass memo. It's not anything else. And now the Times does not issue a sobriquet saying what a wonderful thing McGahn did. And I doubt that they believe he did. And that we have this information. Where were these people? All through history, we see the most terrible things happen because people remain silent or fail to act in any effective way. So we have him, at the very least, bringing to people large costs to defend themselves and stress. Now, some people, however law-abiding, when they see the lights of a cop car behind them, that immediately causes some stress. They may not have done anything wrong, but they think if somebody's coming for them, they must have. That's how effective these tactics are. And so, think of, you see a cop car behind you, and the lights are going on, and you wonder, is that about me? Multiply that by 30 or 40 times. Extend the period of time that you're in this stress and duress from one day, a passing comment at a cocktail party, to half a year, to 2 years. And the money keeps going to lawyers to protect you, and you're righteous in your defense, but no one's going to know it because our system grinds slow and fine. Now, when Trump gets reelected, in his mind, the new staff will not be putting up guardrails to what he wants to do. He also, because of the Supreme Court, if he wins, continues to have immunity from prosecution. So, in the Times today, they discussed 7 Trump targets. And they're obvious, and you know them. But the details that they provide and the nature of the objective he had that went mostly unfulfilled in the sense of convictions and things like that. So, first of all, his argument to get Comey was he didn't get Hillary. And he did investigate Trump. Number 1, they could never get the Justice Department to prosecute him. They went after him in a variety of ways, but they couldn't close the deal. And you may remember how they tried to mess up McCabe's life, and I don't know if it was ever settled, because it was close to his retirement, and the question was them firing him so that he couldn't have the benefit of that day or two that would give him the retirement. And there were investigations of him, but they didn't involve indictments. There's a guy whose name I can never say right, Strazak, I think it is. And he also was chased around the room, but nothing happened. Now Bolton, who is as pompous and as full of himself as he is and can be erudite and insightful and dead wrong, he's entitled to do all those things. None of those things are criminal. But he wrote a book, and it was a kind of tell-all, and it was very unflattering toward Trump. And so, how did Trump deal with him? They did everything they could to mess up the release of his book. Now, my complaint about his book was, as is true of many people, that why weren't you saying this at the time when we're talking about how how Ukraine is being mishandled inappropriately, twisting things to help Trump find an issue against Biden in what was then an approaching election year. So he also, of course, the big Megillah in the entire pageant of corruption and bad effects was him chasing Hillary. Not just because of Comey on the Hill. They did all sorts of things chasing her, and they couldn't get her because there was nothing there. But then they did prosecute her counsel, and he was acquitted. So this is the old regime. What's going to happen in the new regime? More Trump judges, prosecutors that do what he asked them, a chief of staff, and a counsel to the president that do what he wants. This is pretty terrible. Now, Kerry is very interesting because you would say to yourself, why would anybody in the world be against Senator Kerry? And what Kerry did was he did a deal with Iran that was generally accepted as brilliant and supported certainly by the Democrats. But he wanted to get Kerry because he disagreed with the policy. There was no wrong conduct here. There's a difference in ideology, philosophy, and those of us who think fewer wars are better and diplomacy is exceptional, and that it's pretty hard for us to justify some of our positions on nuclear weapons when we're the only ones that use them, have used them. So we have Kerry was chased. They investigated him, but they couldn't do anything with it. And of course, there's Cohen, Trump's fixer. So you get a sense of the array. And the way he did get it, Cohen was under house arrest, in part because of the pandemic. And they told him they were going to put him back in custody unless he agreed not to write a book about what he knew. And good lawyers fought, and ultimately that punishment was not allowed. So this is a kind of short list of what we could expect if Trump is elected. And it's not impossible. We have great hope now that it won't happen. But when you talk to people and you're suggesting to them why he would make a terrible president, you could say, this is a guy who does not believe in the First Amendment to the Constitution, does not believe people have free speech. I've argued for a long time, my concern is about free speech being prepositional. You have freedom of speech, you don't have freedom after speech, the only time it matters. So we have that. Now, I've identified some people, but there are incidents involving CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, in which Trump has tried to override the First Amendment and misapply the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, searches and seizures and things like that, and what we call due process, which is basically fundamental fairness. So for those of us who don't want to be a banana republic or mimic the worst of what does happen in some nation states, should keep in mind that this man is in his past already a proven dictator, despot. Now, the other big story that I like, again in the New York Times, had to do, and you know, I'm a vegetarian, a vegan as best I can be, and from the time I was a kid, I didn't understand killing animals, and but I must say that I changed my course in my 40s because I just thought the diet was wrong. Meat, milk, things, chicken, things like that. And it turns out that my choices were environmental, helps the environment, but there aren't enough of us, and so we face terrible possibilities. So a diet of meat, for example, involves killing 80 billion animals a year, slaughtered every year in those numbers. Now, this has cost us a lot of farmland, and in South America, where cutting the trees down was equivalent to cutting back the lungs of the world, because the rainforest produced so much oxygen to offset the greenhouse gases. But that's becoming worse because we just keep cutting things down so people can have a piece of meat. What is a tipping point? I don't know, but consider the variables. Have more children, 13 if you can, 5. Every woman should have a child, at least one. And then, what do we feed them? Where do they live? What resources do we have that can replenish itself, that would allow this not to be a political suicide pact, to not be smart about how we have children, the resources we consume, and so forth. So, most of the world's farmland is going, and we have what are called zoonotic diseases. Don't you love that word? Z-O-O-N-A-T-I-C. And what is that? That's a spread between species, between human and animal, of diseases that can be minor, but can also be very serious. So, I mentioned this before, and it is the tragedy of the commons. It goes over so many situations, and I think it's immediately understood. So the tragedy of the commons, imagine you're in Boston, not a bad thing. You're on the sweeping commons, which I'm sure has been circumscribed since I was last there. And somebody has a couple of cows, and they let their cows graze on the commons. More people start letting their cows appear. And then the tragedy is, all of a sudden we have too many cows grazing on the commons, and they graze it down to the earth. And there's dirt, and the rain comes, and there's mud, and there's no longer an ability for that cattle to graze. What do you think is going to happen worldwide? Now, you know the current answer? The current answer is we're going to grow meat in steel vats from cells or microorganisms. Sounds like a good diet, huh? Now, my theory about why I never had any compunction about having a vegetarian diet, well, of course, there's I don't believe I focused on the unstated one. I thought I'd live longer because of it, thought it'd be healthier. And I liked vegetables as a kid, so it wasn't a big sacrifice for me. And most people, when they come to me, they say, what are you going to eat on Thanksgiving? I tell them, if you subtract the meat, everything else is a vegetable or a carbohydrate, right? So it's not a big sacrifice. I can still have my cranberry sauce, maybe. So look at your life that way. In swimming, I see the same thing. Some people come to me and they do these athletic events, and a component of it is swimming. And they say, how do you swim so long? And I say, well, how it's not different than walking or running a long distance, because you meditate upon it. So if you don't enjoy the water, then the time goes slowly. So just run foot races. That's what I would do if I had that view. Now, I haven't been in a foot race for years, but maybe there's a couple of K things floating around I'd use as a focus to get in shape, not to make a worldwide time, not that I could. So I offer two things for you to consider. One is the corruption that is Trump has so many faces, so many identities. I mentioned Goya some time ago, and I was trying to look up the painting that I couldn't remember. And I came across one of his works, and he had a man in the etching that he did who had one face and then another face and another face, had 3 faces. Trump has 25 faces, each one antagonistic to the best interest of the Commonwealth, if you will, of all of us. And for some reason or other, instead of all these puncture wounds and what's in our best interest, we allow the bleeding to continue. We allow him to persist. He attacks Jews, attacks blacks, he attacks women, attacks gays. Name it. What group doesn't he attack? I think there's only one, and they have to agree with him. White, male, Christians. Christo-fascista. That's who he's with. And why? Do you think he cares about anything? No. He only cares that he be the one standing at the rostrum and getting even with his enemies and making your life and my life miserable. That's Trump to a T. Now, in terms of individual behavior, it's a lot to ask anybody who loves meat to give it up, saying that's what we fought for. But did we fight for diminishing our possibilities of survival or our children or our grandchildren? Did we think we would have so many people on the planet that we would, like the tragedy of the commons, reduce our ability to have meat to eat, to have farmland to serve us other food? So those are my 2 things on this Sunday in my cathedral of trees. So until tomorrow, bye-bye.